The number one distinguishing factor with schools that get better learning outcomes for kids and those that don't is how a leader uses their time.
Relationships matter, and is what I think most educators are most afraid of in the age of AI, that they will be displaced. And yet, every time we go into schools and we ask any person in that building, why do they show up every day as a student or an educator or a staff member? It's people and the relationships.
Computer screen to human being learning works for a small percentage of people who thrive in that environment, but it doesn't work for the majority.
All right, greetings everyone. Welcome back to the AMP to 11 podcast. I am flying solo today as Rebecca is taking a screen-free vacation out in the wilderness, which is greatly deserved. And we look forward to having her join us back later this summer. But it is a great honor that I introduce to everyone our guest today, Paul Bambrick-Santoyo. Paul, how are you doing today? And welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Doing well.
Great. So for those out there that have not read all his books like myself, Paul is the founder and dean of the Leverage Leadership Institute. I was honored as an assistant principal that my principal gained entry into that institute. And a lot of what I learned about how to be an impactful and effective administrator came from the works of Paul's books. So Paul has written a number of books. It's had a major impact on schools worldwide. He's written, most recently, Leverage Leadership 3.0, which is what we are so excited to discuss with all of the transformations that are occurring in education, especially in the age of AI. Paul, thank you for all the work you've done. What I love to start with always is letting our guests really share their journey and their why. So Paul, the floor is yours. If you could let our listeners know a little bit about yourself and how we got to where we are today. Take it away.
I'll share with you a story that some of the listeners might know. It's how I open every workshop because I think it's the same why. I grew up just outside Chicago. And as a young boy, I was obsessed with imitating my heroes. And as a young boy who loved sports, that meant my heroes were people like Ryan Sandberg and Andre Dawson on the Chicago Cubs when the Cubs won nothing. Um, and the biggest one was Michael Jordan. And I remember after watching him play, I'd go outside and try to dribble like him or pass like him or shoot like him. And you can't see in this podcast, but given my size of 5'6" and my relative lack of talent, I was never that good, but I did get better. And that idea of imitating heroes carried with me into the classroom. I began teaching in Mexico City, a wholly different urban landscape than what we face here. And I remember my first days teaching middle school and high school. I wasn't very good. But during the breaks, I would take my prep period and I would go visit the classroom of the best teacher in the school, Roxana Aparicio. And when I'd walk into her classroom, at first it felt like magic. She could take the same students I just taught who had been bored or disengaged, had they completely participating and learning at the highest levels. But the more I watched, the more I saw there was a move she made or words she used, and I imitated them and I got better. And that carried with me in my first days as a school leader in Newark, New Jersey. And it carried with me in my first days as a principal supervisor. And fast forward now 25 years later, and I've had the chance to work with over 100,000 school leaders across the globe and in 100 different cities where they are now the highest gaining or highest achieving school in their district, state, or country. And we've learned what separates good from great. We've created a cycle of replicating the practices of those who get to great and teaching others to do the same. And so that's where I am now. As I spent my life saying, what can I do to make leadership reachable, attainable, and directly correlate to better student learning outcomes for children, particularly in schools that need it the most. All the schools I've worked with, 99% of them have been schools with high through to such populations, high percentage of students of color, special ed students, English language learners, because I feel if we can succeed in those environments, we can succeed anywhere. And so that's been my journey up to today.
Wow. Well, thank you. And again, just for our listeners out there, that is, when you talk about impact in education and starting in a classroom and the direct relationship you have and the outcomes you can have to now, as you said, impacting especially urban schools and over 100,000 leaders. Like the magnitude of that is so impressive. So thank you for always sharing the wisdom that you have. I will tell you that the chief of staff at Amplify and Elevate Innovation is Versha Munchie South. We've had many great guests on the podcast. She said, I cannot believe that Paul is joining us because she treats your books, like many leaders, as their Bible. This is what they use to become effective, impactful urban leaders. So, again, just want to say on behalf of her and so many other leaders who have shared that with me, thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, we find ourselves, right? You've had this impact in the world of education, pre AI being, well, it's been there now that we're in the age of generative AI. You now have the ability to use a new tool to potentially be an even more impactful leader. So I'd love if you could share with everyone from your newest work, Leverage Leadership 3.0, what is new and unique about this? What are your learnings that it allowed you to use AI to share with others how to be more impactful? And what are some of those main tenets from your original works that, regardless of the age of AI or not, that you really want to make sure stay front and center for leaders out there?
My books are littered with a tool I use to make it easy to remember. I call it a core idea. And so it's a way to try to create pithy, summative statements that capture it. And the original core idea I wrote in my first book continues to remain true, that exceptional leaders succeed because of how they use their time, what they do, and how they do it. And what has been extraordinary since that first book is 16 years later, that is still true today. The number one distinguishing factor with schools that get better learning outcomes for kids and those that don't is how a leader uses their time. And so, in that context, I was a late adopter of AI. I started really using it only about 2 years ago. And really, it came to be when the World Bank reached out to me. Many years ago, I began working in Latin America, and the World Bank invited me to meet with all the secretaries of education of all the countries of Latin America, from as far south as Uruguay to the Dominican Republic to Mexico, et cetera. And in the process, I began working with a number of the countries. We raised early literacy results in the Dominican Republic with the National Principals Academy and things of that nature. And so the World Bank then followed up with me about 18 months ago and said, listen, we'd like to write about AI for school leaders in Latin America. So it's fascinating for you potentially is that I began my journey with AI in Latin America, not even in this country. And so they surveyed 5,000 school leaders across all the countries. And they asked them, what are the biggest things getting away from your school being better? And they gave an answer that would be predictable for almost any school leader in the world. The administrative burden, the bureaucratic work that we ask school leaders to do that isn't about teaching and learning in kids. And so the World Bank just said, okay, let's make a working group of 100 of those leaders from about 8 different countries, and let's work with them only to do that. And the goal was very concrete. Can we use AI to reduce the amount of administrative work by 10 hours a week? And measuring it by leaders' self-assessment and by leaders saying when did they go to bed, when did they stop working each day, to say, did we actually change their workday? And it was a success. The average amount of hours gained was 10 hours a week for all the leaders in the program just by using AI. Now, the World Bank model was a very simple one. It was just teaching a simple prompting framework to put into whatever AI you use, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, to just make the answers you get more precise. And we named that prompting framework. I'm going to translate it now into English. The book we wrote, El Director Libre, is only in Spanish. But if you're a Spanish listener, feel free to download that from the World Bank site. It's a free access book and you can read it. I've since refined it for an English context. And I would say the prompting framework was me, you, what, how. Tell AI who you are, tell them your context, tell them what matters to you. Then tell AI who you want them to be, then tell them what you want and how you want it. And after you do that, always revise and add a personal touch. In today's day and age, that's pretty common sense for most people who use AI. They know that. Although many people forget to tell AI who you want it to be. It's important to say, be my communications specialist or be my Fortune 500 CFO. Like, that that little detail can change the outcome of what you'd get. And so there's a very simple app just placed on top of ChatGPT, just coach them. And then we designed like, here are the core structure of prompts to get a memo to send out to parents, and a version for parents, a version for faculty, a version for the community for a community event, a set of prompts to get an agenda to solve a problem, a set of prompts to stop absenteeism. And so the book is really just a set of prompts you can plug into generic AI and it gets you better answers. So the success was 10 hours gained. What was left undone was okay, so what are we doing with those 10 hours that actually improves the quality of learning and teaching in the school? That was just left as too big of a project for this first project. And so, and that's where I picked it up. I said, okay, so we've been able to prove that AI can reduce time and you can get things done faster. What would it look like to translate that to actually improving student learning? And that began my journey of looking at how AI has been used across the sectors and particularly noticing the key errors that AI has. I consider them have two flaws. The first is the flaw of it just makes mistakes. And again, I'm preaching to the choir of many in this audience, but it was a news to me to realize that AI is totally different than a computer because a computer is based on basic one and zero. Every choice you make is one or a zero. And so that's when you press send on an email, it sends because there's no choice to be made. And that AI is purely probability. I use this example. You ask AI, who's the head of the Catholic Church? It scans the universe of information, finds out that 97 of the people in the social media say Pope, 5% say Trump, 5% say Biden. It's like, okay, I guess it's the Pope. But it doesn't have certainty, it only has probability. And so when you realize it only has probabilities, that's when you get crazy answers. That's when you get answers that are wrong or that are off. And most of us have experienced that. That's the risk of AI. That's why we don't use AI for mental health. We don't use AI recommended for healthcare questions because you can get answers that are just wrong. But the other biggest problem of generic AI is that it does not include proprietary content. It doesn't have my books. It doesn't have textbooks because it's not allowed to upload that material into AI. Some people have bootlegged parts of it, but you probably saw the lawsuit settled by Anthropic for billions of dollars when they tried to upload a bunch of books and hide it. And so, but because of that, it goes into the world of information at the level of Wikipedia, not in the world of expertise. And that's why the movement that most attracted me that's occurred over the past few years is specialized LLMs, language learning models that have a narrow proprietary group of information. My wife is a doctor. She uses open evidence every day. Open evidence is a specialized language learning model that only has verified books, medical textbooks that the medical community has approved as standard procedure. And so when she's doing a diagnosis or working through analyzing test results, she has a specialized expert in her corner who can help her get information. Same thing, ChatGPT Law, same thing for Bloomberg Finance. These are specialized LLMs that I think are the future of AI, is that you guarantee your information is coming from a smaller pool of verified information. And so the odds of it being accurate and high leverage go way up. Because without it, the problem with generic AI is what I call the flaw of the average. Not only does it look for general information, but it also looks for the middle. If you do a curve of information, it will always pick the middle most frequent answer. It'll never pick the outline, extraordinary, exceptional idea. And so that led me on a journey to say, why don't we make a specialized LLM for school leaders that draws only from exceptional answers of extraordinary outcomes, not from the average? And so I began the journey about a year ago of creating a specialized LLM, and I just uploaded all of my 12 books. And if you've ever taken a workshop with me, you know I'm famous for one pagers, trying to synthesize it down to a page, exemplars, videos. We just put it all into the app and started to teach it. Only, only fish in this pool, and now help leaders generate the resources they need. And so, and the basic mantra of our experience was spend less time on your laptop and more time face to face coaching. And so, in that, I think you hear from me the number one mantra of anything we do with AI is, does it increase face to face contact? I think we've learned from the pandemic, we've learned that computer screen to human being learning works for a small percentage of people who thrive in that environment, but it doesn't work for the majority. The majority don't learn as well. And and so the key driver I continue to see 16 years later that separates good schools from great is the amount of face-to-face coaching that teachers get and the amount of face-to-face teaching that students get. And so this app was our ability to allow leaders to focus on what matters most, getting in front of coaches. And so what we did is we brought a working group together of the highest achieving school leaders. When I say highest achieving, I define that by measurable student outcomes. So these are school leaders that on their state tests or AP exams or SAT exams made larger gains in achievement than comparable schools around them. And these are school leaders that had made 20, 30-point gains in achievement, or leaders that I'll talk later about Rick Romaine, who went from the 10th percentile in New York City to the 95th percentile on his state test results, serving kids that are nearly all free reduced lunch. And we brought them together and said, let's coach this LLM, specialized LLM, to do things to your standard. And so we set out to create exemplar prompts, guides, and narrowed the coaching so that we could produce something that leaders could use that could raise the ceiling for their coaching and do it in less time. So we can go in many directions there, but I'll pause there, Brett, to let you take over. Just, but that's the journey I've been on with AI since 2 years ago to today.
Well, I think, I speak for everyone that I'm in community with. We often talk about, and this is the biggest thing I think that came out of ISTE this year. How do you keep humanity at the center of education in the age of AI? And I think you just talked about it's like an imperative that that is remains at the highest level for our leaders. I am so excited to listen and learn. One, for leaders out there who are listening to this, they might be wise to hear about the study and works that you did in Latin America around what are the best uses of it to regain 10 hours that had, better outcome efficiency metrics? And then what are the best action moves? Someone like you said, who just made those tremendous gains in New York City, what are they doing with that repurposed time that's allowing them to be more present, that's allowing them to have more face to face time? Because I think you are very good at telling, like, here's like the action, or here's the synthesis of it. I think our listeners, it would be a great honor to hear from you. What are some of those exact action moves that are now evidence based that they could be doing themselves after, they get access to your book and resources that they could be transforming for the upcoming school year?
The biggest thing we learned out of the gate was we came up with 10 case studies of the biggest time drains for school leaders. I'm going to pull it up right now. We had them track their time and how they spent it for like a few weeks, and then just noticed where was their time getting drained. And then we identified 10 user cases that were the most important for them to solve. And they were your personal schedule, processing long state district sent reports that you have to understand what you have to do with this and you have to act upon them, throwing out communications that you need to parents or your community or students quickly, especially in moments of crisis, automizing certain communications that don't have to be so time consuming, like the weekly memo you send to your faculty, like rather than spend 6 hours on Sunday writing this, how to do that easier, problem solving meetings, attendance tracking, quick meeting development, security networks, and helping teachers be innovators with AI, like just creating a culture where they can innovate. So those are the 10 user cases we solved. And we just designed a set of prompts for each one that you could say, here are the prompts you could use in Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, whatever you want, that could immediately get you better answers in each of these ways and save you time in your planning. And so those were the user cases that and then the group grappled and rumbled, and like the first prompts didn't work. They got frustrated. So they made the prompts more narrow until as a collective, they felt like, okay, these prompts are now working. And those are what we published in the book. The clearest example, it'd be like communications of a fun event. If you think about the me, you, what, how framework I gave you earlier, it was like, okay, I am the principal of a school of 800 students, all elementary students. That's the me. And we're planning a family fun day in the park for Saturday from 10 to 1. Okay, that's the me. You. Be my multimedia communications specialist. Then the what. Here are the details of my plan. It's from 9 to 1. It's at Sunshine Park in Montevideo, Uruguay. Every family should bring one dessert or one snack. There will be these games available. And how? Please write me the note that I can send to the students, the note I can send home to families, and the note I can put in the community newsletter or newspaper so that we can publish it and adjust the notes to every audience. So it gave for principals really fast an ability to do this family fun day in 20 minutes rather than in 3 or 4 hours. And so that was just one simple example that was like a moment that leaders really excited about to spend less time worried about that.
That's incredible. And I think what you really touched on, and just to actually validate this point, yesterday I spent 2 hours in a district in a high school principal's office with his administrative team, and over his shoulder was many of your books, and we talked about these things, and we really use a wisdom collection protocol where we just let them talk so we can speak face to face, and we just have a transcript recording our conversation in the background, and we went around talking about what are the most meaningful but menial tasks that you are, charged with, that your school won't run effectively without you doing, but really mirror many of exactly what you just pointed out. Those are the biggest drains on time. And if there's more efficient ways to do it using that methodology you just described, I mean, that's the way forward, because it again repurposes that time for what they all said. I asked, what fills your cup? It's being in classrooms, helping teachers get better, building relationships with students in the community. And, that repurposement of time is what they were so excited by when it comes to how could AI actually help them do their jobs better and ultimately help students learn better. I'd love it if you could share some of these stories you're mentioning and referencing, like the one about the New York City leader. Now we know what they're trying to make more efficient in their daily tasks that the evidence points to should be best practices. Now, what were they doing with that repurposed time? And any stories or evidence you could share would be so worthwhile for all the leaders out there.
So this is really just about time right now. We'll add the AI add on after that. But Rick Romaine is a phenomenal story. He's in Brooklyn, New York. Like I said, he went from first to last to first in his district, from 10th percentile to 95th percentile of 750 schools in all of New York City. Incredible, inspirational story. And yet, if you met him, he's like a quiet, shy college professor. He could be a librarian. You would never think he was the leader of the most dynamic, evolving, improving school in the city. And but what he was relentless about his time. And I said, "How did you do it, Rick? Like, how did you make sure you were spending time face to face coaching?" He's like, "I just did two things. I observed my teachers regularly, and I was constantly meeting with them in team meetings to do what we call weekly data meetings or planning meetings or giving feedback." I'm like, "But how did you do it, Rick?" And he said, "I'll tell you a secret. I'm not really good with my time, but I had a superb secretary." And so I said to the secretary, "Listen, I want to meet with every grade level team every week, and I want to observe this teachers on this frequency. Help me build a schedule." And they built it together. "And I want you to hold me to it." And she was relentless. She'd knock on his door. "Rick, you're supposed to be observing right now. Get out." When a parent showed up that I have to meet right now, I was like, "Nope, Rick is observing right now. I can set up another time for you to meet with him." Or when a teacher would show up and say, "I have this question about materials. I'll fix the materials problem, or I'll work on the copy machine for you," because Rick has to meet with another group of teachers. And he said he gives her like half the credit for everything that happened or more, because he's like, once I had the habit of sitting regularly with teachers to coach them, and I had the habit of giving myself the time to prepare to coach them, and the habit of observing, learning took off. Learning took off. And so I like to say to leaders, find yourself a hound. Who's the person who you can give them charge of your schedule and you can say, your job is to keep me in classrooms and meeting with teachers. And you have to empower them. There are very few secretaries in a school that feel that they have that power and authority to talk to their leader the way Rick's secretary does. But if you give them that, they will take it. And it's got to be someone who's good at time task management, who it comes naturally for them because they can think about it and help you. And I've seen this play out in every way. I've seen it play out in my personal life. If you've ever had a child who struggled with executive functioning, you know the power of coaching on executive functioning. It changes your life. I still remember watching one of my children get coached, and this little tip that to not be distracted with your laptop that the coach taught my child and said, listen, when you're on your laptop doing schoolwork, face towards this wall. When you want to check the internet, turn your chair to the other side of the table, turn your laptop 90 degrees, and then check the internet. And she's like, you'll train your brain one way you face, you do work, the other way you face, you play. It's like, that's just brilliant. Well, this is just executive function for school leaders. That we need a coach to help us change our time. Now, many of the success stories I talk about are leaders who figure that out first and then just need to know what to do. There are the Ricks who he was trained enough in leadership to know what to do. He just didn't find the way to do it. And so a hound can help you. And that can be whoever you want, but someone who's going to hold you to your calendar and hold you to your schedule. And then the other magic of Rick Secretary is every Monday morning, okay, let's adjust your schedule this week because you've got a field trip on Tuesday and the district has called you out on Thursday. So rather than just say only for the ideal week, we adjust. And then she'll make all the calls. She'll email all the teachers. She'll tell them the new schedule. Rick doesn't have to do that. Rick just shows up at the right time that the secretary tells him to show up, and he shows up prepared. It is such a simple formula, Brett, but I think we could dramatically improve student achievement immediately if we did those two things. Someone hounded us to do time the right way. They have to know what's the right use of time, and then give leaders the tools to how to use that time once properly allocated effectively. I think those two things alone would dramatically change student achievement.
Again, what I'm learning about AI, and it's validating to hear from leaders such as yourself, is there are some very common sense moves. It's getting people unstuck from habits, mental models, systems. Something you just said that has come up a lot, and maybe you have the exact pathway, maybe this will be what we learned from your book, but a lot of leaders recognize the need to change. And when we do executive coaching with them, a lot of it is executive functioning skills for them as leaders, their teachers, their students. And we use AI to take large swaths of data and anecdotal evidence and wisdom collection interviews and then help them create, here's actually the executive functioning gaps that your students actually are struggling with, not what we might perceive or think they are because of, experiences. What is your pathway for success? You just named shaping the path, who you need to have on the journey with you. How does one go about actually doing that?
It's a two-part question. So tell me where you want to go. Like the finding your how is a very simple, short path. Then the how do you spend your time is an additional answer. Do you want to go on the how you spend your time, or do you want to go on the how do you shape?
So imagine, yeah, no, that's a great question. And you're right. So here's the first one, conceptualize for a leader who's, they're listening to this podcast. They're like, okay, I got this. I even know the right person for this. What are the exact, there's no, if there is a prescribed way, a lot of people like to know, okay, step one, do this. Step two, do this. If there are a progression of steps that you would recommend on how to even build that initial system, maybe we start there. And then there's what are the steps for what you're actually doing that are going to transform student outcomes? Like what does Rick do in those teacher meetings that's so impactful and effective, right? Because holding that space is crucial and changing that habit is crucial. And yet without additional refinement and training, those could also be an inefficient use of time and maybe not impactful. So Rick did something right. What are the steps maybe that you're willing to share with us?
Yeah. So let's start with your schedule. So, how do you build your schedule? So, the first should not be secret, but the first secret or core idea to great leadership is that teachers grow the best with one primary coach, not with multiple people giving them feedback. And the first big error schools make is they have a large leadership team, or they have even just a principal and assistant principal, and they're like, we're all going to all observe everybody and we're all going to give feedback to everybody. And what that means is you see people infrequently. And from one leader, they hear this, from the other leader, they hear this. And then they have to figure out how to reconcile those two pieces of feedback. And it is frustrating and it slows their growth. If you imagine, I love sports, I'll give many sporting analogies. You imagine a football team, there's an offensive line coach, there's a defensive line coach, there's a cornerbacks coach, there is a quarterback coach, there is a running back coach, and there's a head coach. But the main coach who's developing each individual player is your specialized coach for your area. And the head coach makes sure all those coaches are aligned to a same vision and plan. I think the same thing should be happening in schools. Simple leadership team, principal and assistant principal, divide your school in half. You got half the teachers, I have half the teachers. Even if the principal is the only one who can write a formal evaluation, formal evaluations do not count as teacher coaching. I'll say that very firmly. They don't coach. Those are evaluative tools. They're requirements. We have to do them. Yes, but they're not coaching. So if we acknowledge that, then we're not going to over prioritize our time spent on formal evaluations because those are just a requirement. So I'd rather you win the award of coaching, not of the best written formal evaluation, because the leaders who get the results aren't writing superb 17-page formal evaluations. They're doing coaching. And so, larger leadership team, you got a high school principal as assistant principal and multiple department chairs. Distribute your staff over all of those instructional leaders. You have not many instructional leaders. Pick two teachers who are extraordinary. You can give a stretch assignment. Will you coach two of your peers while also teaching? And most leaders I do find like some small stipend they can give that teacher, and the teacher's thrilled to be honored as like a veteran teacher. When you do that, 90% of schools in the United States can get to a 15-to-1 ratio of teacher to leader. People don't believe that number because they think, no, I've got 60 teachers, but they forget the number of people who could actually coach. And that number is coming down. School districts are just increasing their leadership teams. There are more people coaching. But you have to really realize if a district is sending some centralized coach to your school and you don't include them, well, then maybe your number is not high enough. If you do, things change. And so if you get to a ratio of 15-to-1 or less, you can coach every teacher in the school every week. And this is the bombshell moment for a school leader who thinks, no, I can only coach a teacher once every few months and I'm in the best. Rich Marzano wrote in his book, Teacher Supervision and Evaluation, that like the average teachers observe once every 2 years and the average rookies observe twice a year. So you could comfortably say, well, I observe my teachers 5 times a year, so I'm good. That's not the formula for dramatic gains in achievement. The formula is weekly or biweekly coaching, not just observing and then follow up face to face. Second principle, email feedback does not work. So any AI tool that decides we're going to save you time by generating automated emails after your observation, great if you need follow up, like compliance, but not a teacher developer. So 90% can get to 15-to-1, 100% can normally get to 30-to-1. It's 99%. I've met very few leaders in the United States who can't get to 30-to-1. But if you get to that ratio, you can build a meeting, you can build a schedule where you're now meeting with them face to face every week or every other week if you're above 15-to-1 and observing them every week. And how? Because you start by locking in those meetings into your schedule. You start from a blank piece of paper and say, okay, let me lock in my meetings first. Here's when my faculty meeting is. And normally you can schedule a leadership meeting at various points, so wait on that. And here's when I could meet with each of these teachers I'm responsible for on their prep periods. And I can meet with them in teams or individually. Some people just teams. I mean, the first grade team, like Rick was teams. Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, you met with them as a team. That goes in the schedule first because you got to figure out the prep periods to make sure they're free at the same time. Then you put your leadership team meeting on your schedule. And then when you're done with that, we also put what we call student culture time. Blackout time is when student crises or issues are going to happen that'll likely blow up your meeting. And it's pretty easy to know when those are. That's breakfast, lunch, and dismissal. And and then as a leadership team, you decide, no, we can't have each of us responsible for every breakfast, every lunch, and every dismissal 5 days a week, or we don't get anything done. So you say, who's the buck stops here person? All right, well, I'll be when they arrive, but only the AP is in charge of Monday arrival if something big happens. So everybody else knows we can go off and do our coaching. And so the principal say, I've got morning arrival every day, but lunch, AP, you've got it. Or I'm going to do one lunch a week. And dismissal, you're going to do it. And so you block those off. And now you've got all your meetings. And then it's say, okay, add your observation time. And what we teach in observation is in 15 minutes, you can learn everything you need to know to coach a teacher. Move away from full block observations and get to 3 to 4 teachers in a single teaching block. And I can talk about how if we want to, but that'd be a sidebar for the moment. But that means with 4 observation blocks a week, you're getting to 15 teachers. So you start to do the math. You've got 4 observation blocks. You've got 15 meeting blocks. If you did individual, that's 20 hours a week. That's, you know, that's less than half your time. And if you meet with some of them in teams, it's likely 10 hours a week, 12 hours a week, maybe 14. If an instructional leader spends 40% of their time observing and coaching, they see gains in achievement. It sounds like such a reasonable number, and yet it is a game changer because normally what happens is an instructional leader has 1 week of the year that looks like that, and every other year doesn't. Every other week doesn't. Every other week gets blown up, or we don't hold to it, or we're not consistent. But by locking those meetings in, what do? A teacher does, you don't have to look for a teacher to get them feedback. You don't have to send a follow-up email to give them feedback. They know when they're going to find you. And you feel the pressure. They're meeting with me at Tuesday at 10. I better have observed them before then. Or I better have taken a look at their student work before then because I'm accountable. And if you have that hound that makes sure you don't cancel your meetings and says, okay, Tuesday, the district called you into a special meeting. Let's reschedule your teacher. Her other prep period is Wednesday. They take care of that for you. Then teachers don't get dropped. And then the last thing you do to your schedule is plan what I call independent work time. And when I mean independent work time, it is not email check. You're going to check your emails at every moment on your phone. You're always going to check. This is when you can have 2 hours uninterrupted, 2 to 3, to prep for your meetings. When you need to think, when you're looking at student work, when you're looking at a lesson plan, when you're thinking of your observation. And the reality is, for many a school leader, those hours cannot occur during the school day. For many of us, it occurs before school starts or after school ends. It is a harsh reality of leadership. But there is one exception that helps many a leader when a leadership team agrees together to cover for each other. So the AP says from 10 to 12 on Tuesday, I'm going to schedule no meetings. So no matter what happens in the school, I can cover it. Principal, you can work. And that will only work if the principal has a place to work that is not their office. You cannot work in your office if you're a school leader. You will not, you will get interrupted. There's a beautiful, I don't remember where I read this article, but the most interrupted job in America is a principal. Because CEOs have like a phalanx of 17 secretaries blocking you from access. You can't get to Taylor Swift unless like you have direct line. But a principal doesn't have that. And so they get interrupted every day. And so I coach principals. Go to the janitor's closet, or if the social worker's not on site, or the nurse's office isn't there, or go across the street to a coffee shop and tell your AP, only call me if there's blood on the floor. Like, like if it's an emergency. If not, you handle it. And if you can do that, you can get prep work done during the day. If you can't, for some leaders, you're getting to school early or you're doing it after school, but it's got to be a time where you can't be interrupted. That's the building of a schedule. those are all the components. If you put all those into your schedule, you should have still 30% blank, which is for life that happens as a school leader. And if you and then the second part of this formula is to have what I call a Monday meeting with your leadership team. It really can be any day of week, but I love Laura Garza, who's the principal of the year in Dallas, Texas, taught me this name. And I saw Antonio Burt do it as well when he was a principal in Memphis. A Monday meeting is where the leadership team sits down and say, did you meet your schedule this past week? What kept you from your observations or your coaching? What adjustments do we have to make this week? Either because of time or because you got to follow up with somebody. So we say, I did third grade weekly data meeting. We planned a critical reteach lesson around fractions of a whole. They're teaching it on Wednesday at 9 a.m. I'd like to observe. Great. You were supposed to do this. I'll cover you so you can observe that class. Like they adjust their schedules every week to actually respond to what teachers and students need rather than trying to fixate on a locked schedule that never changes and to acknowledge the life as a school leader. So that's the pathway. And in my workshops, Brett, I have found in my Leverage Leadership app, we've built a way to automate it. Like we've taught the app to ask you all the questions to build your schedule. That being said, I think until you visually see it for yourself, you don't get it. And so I still have people take out paper, take out post-its of different colors. And also because our work around executive function, we know as well, color-coded schedules, we follow more than when they don't have color. And so, if you color code your Outlook calendar, you're much more likely to be successful in keeping it. And so we build schedules by hand, and then you can use the app to make it quicker and to adjust it. But I find that until you can visualize how doable it is in front of you, you can't even understand the power of an app or AI to help you make it better.
The whole time you're explaining this, I'm going back in time to my first year as an assistant principal. I want to give some flowers to Greg Dutton, who is the reason we were fortunate enough to have this
Love Greg.
podcast.
Yep. Hello, Greg. Good to talk to you via the internet.
And I authentically mean it. Every single thing you just described is exactly how we did this pre AI. And me being a first year AP, it also happened to be the first year where New York City adopted the Danielson framework, increased the number of observations. And for that 1 year at least, you had to observe all of the attributes of Danielson, not just like the core eight. And I remember thinking, how is this possible that we could ever do this? But it's what you said. The first step was build your schedule. And I think I had 18 teachers that year I was directly responsible for coaching and evaluating. And it's like, right, every 2 weeks, you have to have been in every one of their classrooms. You had to have done a coaching session. You had to have done a pre, and it wasn't about evaluation. I think people were just so shocked from the New York City Department of Education, but really everyone, like that you needed this amount of level of coaching. But it really did create a culture of coaching, overnight there. There's obviously resistance to it because it was just out of the norm, but as a first year AP, this was like the best trial by fire ever, and he was very, he was very rigorous in making sure we saw, like, this is what you prioritize. All the other stuff is important, but nothing's gonna help increase the outcomes of our students, and, the outcomes did show that. So, yeah, listening to that and then thinking now of those parts that were so challenging as a first year AP and anyone really trying to adopt your system, having AI to support some of that work would have been truly like a perfect marriage of your impact that works from all the research you've done and the ways AI, as you've already shown, can make the workload more efficient. I mean, that allows you to really see that schedule and realize you can do this. So I'm so glad to hear how you're taking what's worked pre AI and also empowering leaders to see with AI, this is even more accomplishable and manageable, but just a testament to your work because I lived it and having the ability now to reflect, that's so impressive that he was able to adopt that in a new culture. And I'm sure you have heard these kind of stories from people around the world, like what you did worked and it really changed how a school functions. So just again, like thank you for sharing that wisdom.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. As we begin to wrap up here, some of the things we love to allow our guests, there's two things that we like to end with. One is Rebecca and I usually turn the reins of the AMP to 11 podcast over to our guests. So in this case, Paul, you're now the host of the AMP to 11 podcast for just one question. What's something that's a question that's been top of mind for you that you'd love to discuss and ask, and we could have a quick conversation about? Anything that comes to mind that you'd like to introduce as a topic that we could be discussing? You're now the host, so you take it away.
So you've been doing this podcast, what, 2 years, 3 years now?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. What are the top three biggest insights you have learned from your guests so far?
Oof. Well done. I am going to use the fact that we've had so many amazing guests that I'm not going to attribute this to any specific one guest because I feel like I'm going to do a synthesis here. One insight that I keep going back to is, and you said it as well. So again, credit you as the last person I've heard say it, is this idea that relationships matter and is what I think most educators are most afraid of in the age of AI, that they will be displaced. And yet, every time we go into schools and we ask any person in that building, why do they show up every day as a student or an educator or a staff member? It's people and the relationships. So the biggest one insight is our task in the age of AI is to make sure relationships stay the primary reason we show up and rigor doesn't slip as a result. We only enhance it by using AI more impactfully. So that's like the most important thing I think I've seen over and over again. And every guest has contributed in some way to making sure that happens. You said it as well. So again, this idea that AI is a mindset, a lot of it comes down to whether it's executive functioning, how you're prompting. The tool is agnostic. There are better tools than others that do certain tasks. So we always go back to the driving analogy. Once you learn how to drive a car, then you decide what the task is. Then you pick the best car for that specific task. But the idea of knowing how to drive a multiple types of vehicles is the important thing, and that you have the aptitude and you know how to, navigate different circumstances. So some version of that analogy. I think the last one is similar to what how you just described, a model that you have found is most successful. Whatever our guest has kind of found is their area of expertise and passion. I just heard Richard Culata say this, so I'm going to attribute this to him. We've had on members of the ISTE team before, but some version of what I'm about to say to paraphrase his analogy. Richard flies planes, and Richard said, when Boeing sells someone a plane, they don't just drop off the plane and say good luck. They make sure that everyone who's responsible for that plane understands exactly how to use that plane as it was intended, and not until everyone really understands it do they leave. And so I think one of the things that many of our guests have said that I hope continues to be the way forward in the age of education, AI, innovation, ed tech, et cetera, is when we come up with new solutions and tools, we don't just take the check, drop it off, have one, surface PD and say, all right, y'all got this. It's similar to what you said, teaching everyone all of the skills and ways that you're going to be successful. And the job's not done from the side that's delivering the skills, the content, the platform until everyone feels ready to use those platforms. I think those are the three biggest buckets that I've been fortunate enough to learn over this time.
Those are fantastic and on the spot answers, Brad. Very impressed. Could I respond to number two?
Please, you are the host. You do you.
Yeah. So I completely agree with relationships matter. I love the analogy of Boeing. And you said the tool is agnostic. My only response is when we get to specialized LLMs, we can take away the agnosticism. And I think we can move from it just being another tool to being an amplifier of quality. And so I want to share this vignette to drive that point home. It's a little bit of a long vignette, but I think it'll help the listeners. So I was in a huge school district in Ohio, and I got cornered at the end of the workshop by a group of 10 leaders. After I had shown a bunch of videos of high achieving leaders, we'd done a bunch of exercise of how to look at student work. And they said to me, I think I'm understanding why this is daunting for me. I've never attended a good school in my life, not in preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, college. I don't know what a great school looks like. And so this is all brand new for me. And it just resonated with me so deeply that we lean on our own experience of school to lead. And yet, if we had a school that was on the surface great, but like actually just relied on private tutors or what you did outside of school, like many of us don't have any experience of what excellent teaching can really look and feel like. And so my goal is to create specialized LMs that can raise the floor and raise the ceiling by taking away the agnosticism and saying, this is what works. So I'll give the analogy now more narrowly. I was meeting with a high school principal in South Carolina, and I was introducing them to planning meetings, which is the idea of can you meet with a teacher and help them upgrade their lesson plans? Nearly everywhere in the country is using HQIM, but HQIM is not improving student learning. And so we were teaching them how to do a planning meeting, how you take the lesson. In our Leverage Leadership app, when you log in, you state what state you're in, and then you can immediately upload any lesson plan. It will evaluate its rigor against your state standards and your state tests and tell you how to make adjustments. And so I was saying, okay, high school principal, you're getting ready to coach your biology teacher, 10th grade biology, around this lesson. And I taught him a framework for planning meetings. We watched videos of other school leaders doing it. We evaluated the lesson plan, which gave him some AI generated revisions to amplify the rigor. He was blown away. And then he turned to me and he's like, I just don't know if I'm smart enough to do this. And it was such a vulnerable comment. It was like so beautiful. Like the whole room, it was like everybody was able to be vulnerable and like feel this. And so we said, okay, let's try it. So we plugged it into the Leverage Leadership app, said, plan a planning meeting around this lesson plan for biology. It gave him a no-show chart to unpack the standard. So he learned some about the biology, what students have to know and be able to do to master the standard. So he learned for himself, gave him the adjusted lesson plan, and then gave him a script to meet with the biology teacher. We proceeded to role play the meeting. I put him out what I call the hot seat in front of all the 25 people in the room, and he led the meeting and gave him feedback. And the meeting was the best, like the highest quality of stuff he had ever done before, what his peers said to him. But I asked him, how did it feel? And he's like, this was weird. I've never done this before. And you know what the audience said to him? You looked so smart. And so, and I saw this moment where he just got emotional and realized I do have expertise in my fingertips that moves me away from agnosticism that can raise my floor. And that's where I think AI can be, not just an agnostic tool, but putting expertise in their hands, but it requires specialized LLMs. And if we do that, I think AI can become an amplifier of excellence, not just an augmenter of time.
May I respond to your response?
Yes, yes, we may.
Much appreciated. So I actually want to commend you for pushing that thought deeper. And here's probably an addendum I should have made the first time. What I least like is a learner, is an education leader or a teacher, like listening and learning, and then basically being like, what tool should I use? The thing that you just said that's so important and so nuanced, and now I'm going to give some credit to the work that I do with some of these leaders around the country is we start with what's the safest ethical tool that they've already decided either they've purchased or is part of the suite that they run for communications, etc. And then we say, you already have enough power there to do like what you've just mentioned, but now you need to train that model on expertise. So we call it the AI sandwich strategy. What is all of the human knowledge and expertise pre AI that you've already written? So instructional frameworks, handbooks, mission and vision, beliefs, your best observations that you think are worthy of emulating and replicating. And we say, like, until you have every single piece of that, and we keep pushing and pushing or train an AI model to push you to say, I still wouldn't know how to answer this. And that's the most important part, that wisdom collection and really refining what you're going to create your outputs on. Then we click a button in AI. So I do agree with you. And obviously, the resources that you're providing with Leverage Leadership 3.0 should be included in that. That is so important to me. Once you do that, that's where I mean the AI becomes agnostic. Like, don't look for the next shiny tool. Really work on what resources are you training your model on so that it doesn't do the things you said and go to find the best patterns. Because if you're training it on the best patterns in the United States and what's most likely used in education, it's the results are not what you're getting. So therefore, be really careful about before you click a button, is that the best version of all the resources that you have available, and have you really thought that through? So that is super important, and thank you for calling that part out. I also wanna go back in time and tell you about the thing that you obviously are so passionate about that was the hardest part about adopting this under Greg was the role playing and having your peers be part of it, because it definitely is like the biggest version of imposter syndrome you can feel, but it is the most important part to realize, like, again, you're someone like Greg who builds a community of feedback and, we're gonna push each other, but we're gonna be there for each other. So challenging at first and getting teachers to role play in like a debrief. But once you move past that, it makes them realize, right? Like, get it right in here because the alternative is you get it wrong in there in front of kids. And so if we can all agree, like, hey, this might feel weird, but it's for the kids, usually then people can move forward. But that definitely, I'm glad to hear that story, how validating it was to make sure that person left feeling they are smart. But that's something you definitely want to push on and frame a culture of trust and like why we do it. Otherwise, it could feel like artificial and not helpful, but it's so insightful and helpful. So thanks, Paul, for letting me respond.
I like to say, what we practice is what we value. And so, World Cup teams practice every day. If you're religious, you go to temple or mosque, or you meditate, or you go to church. If we value education, we'll practice. But that is countercultural to our most of our own lived experience.
Well, we close with this always, and you've done a great job of, giving flowers to, that school in New York City and to people like Greg. Before we leave, if you could let listeners know who else out there in the space, and again, you know, don't feel like you have to name every single person. This is just maybe who's top of mind today for you. Who are other folks out there if people listening want to learn about how to utilize, be a better leader, how to utilize AI to help support them in their roles? Obviously, besides going and finding the Leverage Leadership 3.0, who else should they be looking towards for guidance, support, and wisdom?
What I would say is go where student learning has improved. The fastest way to cut through the noise, AI innovators, is impact. And be careful, not impact on their own self created tool that they use to measure their impact. But I believe learning should be measurable. And until we have a better option, our state tests give us measurable data. And it might be inadequate, but it's not counterproductive to learning to master those tests. I think it's an insufficient but necessary step on the journey to college readiness and beyond. And so find the places that are using AI to improve student achievement outcomes. And when you ask that question that way, there aren't many places to look yet. There's a lot of innovation without impact. One of the groups I'm most excited to, work with is like the teaching lab, which recently merged with the Relay Graduate School of Education. But the teaching lab has experimented a lot with on-site coaching of teachers. And they've also got some AI tools they put alongside it. And I think that's a really fun place to see the work they've done. They've done some really cool success stories in New York City with working with schools there, and they've got reach across the country. Sarah Johnson is the CEO there, and her team I think is wonderful to look at. And then from there, I would just start looking at the individual schools and districts that AI is just one part of the tool, but I would just send people to go look where student achievement is getting better. We've got regional superintendents like Tania Pritchard, who's moved the needle for 15,000 students in Washington, D.C., and Susan Hernandez in Richardson Independent School District, Texas. And then individual principals like Marie Coulihan in Albany, New York, and Katie Harshman and Minnequa schools in Pueblo, Colorado, and Charleston County School District that led by Superintendent Anita Huggins. They were the first school district in the country, large one, that reversed the achievement gap for all subgroups post COVID. Like, and so for all like places like Charleston County, their work in AI is well, first, we've now partnered together to do the instructional work, but they just did a lot of back end supports of like improving HR, like making those systems simpler. And so go to the places where the learning has gotten better, and I think you'll cut through the noise and you'll find how is it being used as one tool of many to actually improve outcomes for kids.
That is such a great, again, many of the time things that you're saying are the most common sense and yet least replicated. So again, I hope folks just heard how clear that message is. Thank you for shouting out some of the orgs and some of the districts that people could start looking into and finding, research on. And Paul, last but
And
not least,
I'll just share one final thing. And if you want to learn more with me, you can go to our website, leverageleaders.org. And we have some AI institutes this summer. If you want to come see AI actually changing the quality of instructional leadership, and we'll have another one in the fall in Denver. They'll be all across the country. And check us out at the Leverage Leadership app, and you can see it in action and join a community of other leaders who want to figure it out, not just to do AI, to actually improve learning. And we'd love to have you.
that was what I was just about to ask. And Paul, thank you, because that is the most important thing from these podcasts, right? When we bring on leaders in the field, those that have proven transformational outcomes and impact in schools around the world, around the country, often with the hardest to reach students based on historical demographics. That's who we need to be listening and learning from. Paul, thank you for continuing to revise and refine, you know, all the work you've been doing to make sure it keeps meeting us where we are in this current age of AI. So again, on behalf of the AMP to 11 listeners, thank you for everything you do. And thank you for a really engaging and informative podcast today.
Thank you for having me on your show, Brett. Thank you for having me on your show. It was a gift. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you. And to all our listeners out there, please continue listening and learning at the M211 podcast. And like always, make today and every day a jumbo cannoli day for you and those you love. Thanks, everyone.